The mid-major powerhouse in college basketball is something that should always be celebrated in my opinion. Teams that might not have the richest basketball history, historically the best players, or play in the best conferences, but they still somehow find a way to recruit and compete their way into becoming one of the country's best teams on a consistent basis. We've seen teams like Gonzaga over the last 20 plus years be in the national title conversation, despite not having the most NBA talent and not playing in a power conference. Even going back as far as the days of Bill Russell at San Francisco in the 50s, every once in a while, a mid-major program is going to break through and become a consistent winner, and just maybe win a national title. And the most recent mid-major to win a national championship, a team 35 years ago who would become a cultural phenomenon that matched the pace and the feeling of the city they played in. My name is Caleb, and the definition of what a mid-major is can change depending on who you ask, but it's widely considered that the last mid-major school to win a college basketball national championship was the 1990 UNLV Runnin Rebels, a team that set the tone for college hoops in the 90s and were seen as bigger than just a basketball team. To play in Vegas and to reach the heights that any mid-major program ever dreams of, all culminated into one of the most fascinating championship runs in modern college basketball. Let's talk about the last mid-major team to win a chip, the 1990 UNLV Runnin Rebels. The UNLV basketball program prior to 1990 had built themselves into a respectable mid-major under head coach Jerry Tarkanian. After being hired in 1973, Tark's coaching style of implementing an up-tempo offense and fast-paced style of play, the UNLV basketball program had a unique element that other programs just didn't have at the time. Then just known as the Rebels, the team would officially change their name to the Runnin Rebels, coined by then Sports Information Director Dominic Clark to match Tarkanian's style of play. To my knowledge, the UNLV men's basketball team is one of the only programs in the country to have a unique name in comparison to the rest of the school sports teams, as they are just still known as the Rebels. And the new Runnin Rebels name would stick throughout the 70s and early 80s. Tark's teams would make 10 NCAA tournament appearances from 1973 to 1989, including 2 Final Four appearances in 77 and 87. The program was building its reputation in Sin City, getting more national TV games than your average mid-major, a state-of-the-art on-campus arena at the Thomas & Mack Center, and all that was really missing was a championship banner. And as you probably know, they're really hard to come by in college basketball. Some of the greatest college coaches ever are lucky to have even won one, but to do it as a mid-major was going to take a perfect storm. And a perfect storm typically is made up of the right roster with some of the best players in your school's history. In 1988, the Runnin Rebels would land a Nevada native, Greg Anthony, as a transfer from the University of Portland. After winning Freshman of the Year in the West Coast Conference, he wanted to come home to Vegas and play for Tark and his hometown team. But due to the transfer rules, he had to sit out for a year and miss the 87-88 season. But in the meantime, the Rebels were able to get freshman Stacey Augmon out of Pasadena, California, who showed flashes of how good he could be if he properly developed. He played 34 games off the bench as a freshman, averaging 9 points a game and establishing himself as part of the team's future. Come the 88-89 season, Greg Anthony was now eligible to join the team and named the starting point guard. Stacey Augmon also found himself in the starting lineup as a 3 and one of the main focal points of the offense. The team was skewing younger and found a lot of its contribution from its underclassmen. Anderson Hunt, a shooting guard at Detroit Southwest High School, would join the team as a freshman and immediately contribute out the gate. He started 21 of his 37 games his freshman year, averaging a respectable 12 a game. Behind the run-and-gun Tark offense and his stifling defensive philosophy, UNLV, led by Anthony, Augmon, Hunt, and junior 6'10 center David Butler, would reach the Elite Eight in 1989 with a 29-8 record just 2 years after their most recent Final Four appearance. With another year of development, this team could make a serious title run, but on top of that, would end up landing the best JUCO player in the nation. Larry Johnson out of Dallas, Texas was verbally committed to SMU in 1987, but because of a dispute about his SAT scores, he found himself at Odessa College to get his grades right and hoop at the junior college level. In his 2 years at Odessa, he'd win back-to-back Junior College Player of the Year, to this day the only player to do this. Averaging 29 a game as a sophomore, there were some NBA draft analysts who thought he could go first round out of JUCO, which would have made him the first player ever to do so. But Jerry Tarkanian would come calling, and Larry Johnson would answer. The team who had just made the Elite Eight has now added the best JUCO player in the country to their roster, and what would follow would make them one of the most entertaining and recognizable college basketball teams of all time. To start the 89-90 season, the Rebels were predicted to win the Big West regular season title, coming in as the #1 ranked team in the country in the preseason AP poll. But the season didn't start ideally for a team with multiple players on All-American watch lists. They'd start 3-2 and fall all the way to the number 15th ranked team in the country, but did get a win against the Hank Gathers-led Loyola Marymount Lions in their first game. Like all teams destined for greatness, it took a little bit to find their stride, but when they did, they became one of the most unstoppable and fun teams to watch in all of basketball. After their loss at number 12 Oklahoma, they'd rip off an 11-2 record over their next 13 games, including a couple key power conference wins against number 16 Iowa and number 11 Arkansas. As the team's chemistry with newcomer Larry Johnson began to grow with each output, they were putting on a show in front of their home crowd at Thomas & Mack Arena, selling out pretty much every home game, and when they were on the road, they were more of the main focus than the home team they were playing against. Larry Johnson would emerge as the team's leading scorer and rebounder, averaging 20 and 11 on 62% shooting, getting out in front of the offense and dunking on anyone who was in his way. He was arguably the best player in the country and was shooting up NBA draft boards by the second. With Greg Anthony as the leading assist man, he would find his teammates for lobs, spot up threes, and push the break to lead Tark's Runnin Rebels offense to be one of the most efficient in the country. They were receiving a lot of comparisons to different NBA teams at the time. They were, in a way, a college combination of the Bad Boy Pistons and Showtime Lakers. They'll get out and run with the best of them, but also play the most stifling and hard-nosed defense that would even get some of the best players in the country frustrated to no end. By late January of 1990, the Runnin Rebels were 15-4 and had climbed back to the 5th ranked team in the country. But they'd run into an up-and-coming LSU team that had a freshman Shaquille O'Neal and a sophomore Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, at the time known as Chris Jackson. In a mid-season classic, they'd fall to the Tigers 105-107 after Jackson put up 36 points. Anderson Hunt put up 36 of his own and Larry Johnson would put up 27 himself, but they'd still come up short and drop to number 12 for the time being. Despite competing with the best teams on their schedule, not having any bad losses, and still having some of the best players in the country on their roster, it seemed like they were going to need some more convincing wins to stay in the top 10 for the rest of the year. But it wouldn't come without some speed bumps in the road. Immediately after their game in Baton Rouge, they'd begin the month of February with a Big West matchup against Utah State at home, a game that would reiterate their bad boy-esque persona. UNLV would beat Utah State 124-90, so the game itself wasn't very notable, but what happened after the game would make national headline. UNLV and Utah State would get into a brawl just before the game ended, which then ended up spilling over in the post-game into the tunnels. The Big West Conference hit both schools with probation, with UNLV having multiple players disciplined, including Stacey Augmon, who was averaging 14 a game at the time. But if that game and brawl were worth anything for the Rebels, it set the tone for the rest of the regular season. They'd nearly run the table, winning 12 of their last 13 games, with a good majority of them being by double digits, on their way to becoming the regular season Big West champions. By conference tournament time, they were the number 2 team in the country again, and the scoring load was being spread around the roster. One night it could be Johnson, others it would be Hunt, and on occasion it would even be starting senior center David Butler. The 1990 Big West Tournament took place at Long Beach Arena in Long Beach, California, where the Runnin Rebels drew Cal State Fullerton in the first round, and behind Larry Johnson's 32-14, they'd get a 115-93 win. They beat Pacific pretty handily in the second round before running into Long Beach State in the Big West Championship. UNLV had beaten them twice already during the regular season, and some things just stay the same as they'd get an 18-point win to secure the 1990 Big West Tournament title. With a record of 29-5, a regular season, and a conference tournament title, they'd done all the convincing they needed to the selection committee to garner a number 1 seed in the 1990 NCAA tournament. As the 1 seed in the Western region, they'd draw 16-seeded Arkansas Little Rock, where it was their typical 1-16 game. The Rebels were proceeded to beat the Trojans by 30 and await the 8-seeded Ohio State Buckeyes in the second round. At 17-13, with a solid roster that included a freshman Jim Jackson, they were good but weren't the best matchup for UNLV. In a relatively low-scoring game for Tark's squad, they etched out an 11-point win and advanced to the Sweet 16. So far, so good in the tournament, and each game so far had gone about as you would expect. The 1 seed dominating his first couple games in the tournament wasn't necessarily out of the ordinary, especially for one of the premier mid-major programs of the last 2 decades. But a school who couldn't say they were in familiar territory were the 12-seeded Ball State Cardinals of the Mid-American Conference. They'd made a Cinderella run to the Sweet 16 after beating the Gary Payton-led Oregon State Beavers, and then beating Louisville in the second round to draw the Runnin Rebels in their first ever Sweet 16 appearance. It's not too crazy to think that UNLV came into this game underestimating what Ball State was capable of, as Ball State would hang around the entire 40 minutes of the game. During most of UNLV's close games during that season, there was one point or another where they'd pull away and ice the game, but this game felt a little different. With 13 seconds left, UNLV led by 2 and Greg Anthony stepped to the line for a 1-and-1. He proceeded to miss the free throw and Ball State would rebound and call a timeout once they crossed half court. With a chance to tie or win the game with a 3, UNLV locked in to play one of their best defensive possessions of the entire season to force a turnover and escape with a 2-point win. It would have been fairly poetic to see a smaller mid-major bring down a mid-major powerhouse before they even reached the championship, but UNLV was destined for a ring that year. Now motivated and taking every future opponent seriously, they beat another Cinderella in the Western region in the Elite 8, 11-seeded Loyola Marymount by 30, ending their respectable run that was honoring the fallen Hank Gathers who had passed away just a few weeks earlier from a heart condition. UNLV was now in their second Final Four in 4 years and favored to win the national title as the only one seat left in the field. The 1990 Final Four in Denver was the stage for their semifinal matchup against a very solid Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, one of the best teams in the ACC that year behind ACC Player of the Year Dennis Scott. The Rebels did what they did best and completely outran Georgia Tech in a 9-point win, with Stacey Augmon pouring in 22 points. The Runnin Rebels were finally in the national championship game, and their opponent, the Duke Blue Devils, were in their third straight Final Four. Headlined by senior Phil Henderson and sophomore Christian Laettner, they were in a decent matchup for the fairly similarly built Runnin Rebels. But once the ball tipped off, UNLV gained control and never gave it back. The Runnin Rebels championship performance exemplified what the season and program had been building to this point, gaining a 17-4 fast break points advantage in the first half. Anderson Hunt, who had maybe become the team's unsung hero, led all scorers with 29 on the way to UNLV's first national championship in school history in a 103-73 win, and Hunt was named the Final Four's most outstanding player. 1990 UNLV to this day is the last non-power conference team to win a national championship, and as a mid-major, had one of the most dominant tournament runs in NCAA history, winning 3 tournament games by 30+ points, ending the regular season on an 11-game winning streak, and their 571 points scored throughout the tournament was a new record. The 1991 UNLV Runnin Rebels would be even better than the team that won the championship, reaching new heights of fame and popularity within the college basketball world while still putting on a show on the court. Dating back to the 1990 season, their win streak would reach a school record 45 games and an undefeated regular season all the way back to the Final Four, where they lose in a rematch to the eventual national champion Duke Blue Devil. Larry Johnson would go on to be the #1 pick in 1991 to the Hornets, Stacey Augmon 9th to the Hawks, and Greg Anthony 12th to the Knicks, respectively. Anderson Hunt and David Butler would never play in the NBA, but would go on to have respectable careers overseas. In the era of the transfer portal and NIL, I think we'll still continue to have mid-major powerhouses from time to time, but who knows if we'll ever see one win another championship. A few have gotten close in recent years, but no one since UNLV has gotten over that hump. But mid-majors will always have their place in college basketball, and whenever there's a mid-major dominating at any point in time, college basketball is always more fun. My name is Caleb. If you want to support the channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.